The original Long Island Railroad add-on in Train Sim World was notorious for being one of the worst routes in the entire game, with bad scenery, a borderline non-existent timetable, and questionable decisions on where to end the route coverage. Case in point, Hicksville instead of Ronkonkoma, or better yet, Greenport. In 2024, the route finally got a long overdue update. It only took them the better part of 6 years. But is the new version any good? Well, it's a Dovetail product, and I haven't got much optimism left at this point, but let's have a look through the add-on anyway. The original LIRR add-on was released way back in November 2018, while the extended version was released at the end of April 2024. This new version is just as expensive as most of the recent TSW routes, because it costs £30, or 57 New Zealand dollars, at full price. That is too expensive for something that's mostly an old route, and people who own the original route are really only paying for one new train and an extra 15 miles of track, while the deal is not much better for people who never had the original. What Dovetail could have done instead was release the Long Beach extension, signalling and general route upgrades as a free update while selling the M9 electric multiple unit as a separate add-on. I am expecting the usual comments from people who jump to conclusions, try desperately hard to defend the developers, and claim that I'm just being ungrateful and begging for views, even though I have absolutely no patience for those sorts of comments. However, I am okay with people who disagree with my opinion while still being calm and rational. I got the extended version for $45.59 NZD, as there was an option to pre-order the route with a 10% discount, and Dovetail took off an additional 10% as a loyalty discount for people who already own the original LIRR add-on. I reviewed the original back in June 2023, and I will keep that review public so that you can see just how bad the route was. Frankly, I think it's ridiculous that you still have to pay close to full price for the extended LIRR if you've already got the original. Sorry Dovetail, only doing a 10% loyalty discount is not good enough. If anything, it's more like a slap in the face to people who already own the original route, and I'm sure as hell not the only person who is unhappy with the pricing situation. In terms of route coverage, it's mostly the same as the original, albeit with the debatably welcome addition of the Long Beach branch. In any case, it was always non-linear, and I'll give credit for that. Besides that new addition, you still get the existing New York Penn, Long Island City and Atlantic Terminal to Hicksville, Hempstead and Belmont Park route. There are 126 stations on the full LIRR network, but only 37 of them are featured in TSW. I'm confused as to why Dovetail added the Long Beach branch, of all lines, and what I think they should have done is add one of the following 3 branches instead: Port Washington, Oyster Bay and Ronkonkoma. Or they could have, at the very least, added the West Hempstead and Far Rockaway branches as well as Long Beach. The original route was set in either 2017 or 2018, before Elmont Station opened, and the main line through Mineola was rebuilt with a 3rd track. Speaking of the main line, I've never understood why Dovetail cuts the route coverage at Hicksville, which is only 26 miles from Penn Station, instead of continuing to either Port Jefferson or Ronkonkoma. It's also worth mentioning that Grand Central Madison is not included in the updated LIRR route, and it sucks that Dovetail didn't update the route's time period, and as much as I hate to say it, it is what it is. The lighting has been upgraded to TOD4 spec, and, well, I say upgraded, but the new lighting just makes all the assets look very plasticky, especially when the sky is cloudy. As for the signalling upgrade, this was done by one guy, as far as I know. And from what I've experienced of the route so far, he hasn't done a horrible job, and I can only imagine how difficult it must have been. Now here's a thought. The West Somerset Railway got a major timetable and route upgrade back in February 2024, but that was free of charge. If the devs could do that one free of charge, why is the update for the LIRR payware, and full price at that? As for motive power, the star of the show is the Kawasaki M9 electric multiple unit, which hadn't yet entered service at the time of the original add-on's release. This thing is the most modern EMU in the LIRR's fleet, with the first example entering service in September 2019, so she doesn't actually match the time period of the in-game route. From what I gather, the M9s are meant to replace the older Bud M3 units from the 1980s, and they bear a strong resemblance to the LIRR M7 and Metro North M8 units. As is the case with the M3 and M7, the M9 comes as a married pair, or a 2-car unit, and these can be coupled together to make anything from a 4 to a 12-car train. The married pairs concept isn't just restricted to US commuter lines. For example, it can also be found in Wellington, New Zealand with the Matangi EMUs, and these things can be seen running in consists as long as 8 coaches. As far as I know, at least 200 individual M9 coaches, making up 100 2-car sets, have been built so far, with more still under construction at the time of uploading. Besides the new M9, this add-on also includes the same M7 that was present in the original add-on, but she has received some updated physics, from what I gather. As for the sounds, they're taken from the Metro North M7A on the Harlan line. The Bud M3 was released as a separately sold add-on in May 2020, and I'm confused as to why Dovetail didn't bundle her in with the extended route, despite having done that sort of thing before with the Class 465 Networker in the extended Southeastern high-speed route. Just thinking back to the Oyster Bay branch for a moment. The reason why it was one of my 3 preferred options for a route extension over Long Beach is because it would have required the addition of the EMD DE30AC diesel and DM30AC electro-diesel locomotives, as well as the unusual Kawasaki C3 coaches. In my opinion, seeing the locomotive-hauled LIRR trains would be a damn sight more interesting than just another EMU and electrified branch line. While I think that Dovetail could certainly have picked a more interesting branch than Long Beach, the good thing is that we still have a non-linear route with numerous branch lines, thus making the route more interesting than the likes of Great Western Express, Bremen to Oldenburg, the Antelope Valley Line, and even the London Overground Goblin Line. Apparently, the MTA had some new licensing conditions, and this has resulted in some aspects of the trains being dumbed down to the point of farce. On both the M9 and M7, the circuit breaker panel behind the driver has been plated over, as have the door control panels, so now you can only open the doors by pressing the Y or U keys, or the relevant console equivalent, depending on which side of the track the platform is on. The brake charging is now automatic, and this is annoying because I liked getting to do that myself as part of the original setup process. As for why these changes were made, it's because the MTA was apparently worried about people stealing trains in real life. Because apparently train theft is something that happens often enough to warrant the MTA being as concerned as they are. I've never known any other licenser for a TSW add-on to do this. Ironically, despite the startup sequence being simplified, the alerter and CAD signals are enabled by default this time, instead of being disabled by default with the option to switch them on if you want to. It makes the driving experience a bit more challenging, but I doubt absolutely everyone who plays this route is going to enjoy having to deal with signal speeds and the alerter going off on a frequent basis. While I do have a basic understanding on how ATC, AC, SES and the alerter work, that doesn't mean I want to deal with them all the time. And it doesn't help that you can't turn the damn systems off. To be fair, the cab signals aren't unbearable once you get the hang of them, but the most annoying part about the cab signals, at least from my experience, is when a new signal speed catches you off guard and the brakes suddenly apply themselves out of nowhere. This isn't an emergency brake application, but you do have to keep the brakes at a minimum of 40% until you've slowed down to the signal speed, which is often lower than the track speed. Meanwhile, driving into or out of Long Beach, Belmont Park, and Atlantic Terminal is very tedious due to the restrictive speed limits outside all three of these stations. It's only 5 miles per hour. I remember why Atlantic Terminal has that 5 miles per hour restriction, something to do with an accident there in 2010, but I'm not sure why Belmont Park and Long Beach have it as well. Don't quote me on this, but apparently the sounds for the M9 were actually supplied by someone in the community, because the MTA didn't allow Dovetail to professionally record the sounds, or something of that nature. One of the scenarios, called Double Duty, has you playing as a guard on a Long Beach service. This is quite interesting, partly because it's much longer than the guard mode scenario on the Glossop Line add-on, which was only around 20 minutes. It's just annoying that these are the only cases in the entire game when you can play as a guard, while timetable mode still only lets you play as a driver, passenger, or railfan. As for timetable mode, it's a substantial improvement over the old and unrealistically quiet timetable, although it's a bit weird that Dovetail used 2021 reference material for the timetable despite the route taking place in 2018. The full timetable, which is only available on the PC and Gen 9 console versions, includes 306 playable services for the M9 and 287 for the M7, with an additional 32 services if you've still got the M3 installed as well. Besides Port Washington, Long Beach, Belmont Park, Hempstead, and Ronkonkoma, the other destinations whose services have finally been added to timetable mode include Far Rockaway, West Hempstead, Babylon, and Huntington. You may have noticed the lack of any representation of the Oyster Bay and Port Jefferson services, so the rail scene is still not entirely realistic. Incidentally, I noticed the same problem with the AI trains that's present on the Harlem line, where the trains sometimes pull up right behind the next one in front. Apparently they go full throttle right up to a red signal or train, but don't quote me on that. In any case, it's annoying whenever this happens due to how silly and unrealistic it looks. Something else that I like on the extended LIRR are these new, and much more realistic, passenger information screens, which actually have different designs depending on what part of the route you're at. I dare say a lot of people, myself included, would be rather annoyed if Dovetail hadn't bothered changing the existing ones from the original route, which were a completely inaccurate design that went on to be reused on the Peninsula Corridor, Boston Sprinter, and Harlem Line routes. If you've got the New York to Trenton route installed, you'll see Amtrak ACS-64 and New Jersey Transit ALP-46 locomotives, with their respective coaches, parked at Sunnyside Yard in timetable mode. The same goes for the Amtrak Acela Express. But for some reason, there is an invisible wall across all these tracks, so you can't actually walk over to the engines if you spawn on foot. I uninstalled that awful New York to Trenton thing soon after releasing my updated review of it in October 2023, because I couldn't stand the constant lag/stuttering. But I decided to reinstall the route for these short scenes in the LIRR review. And I haven't really bothered to do another proper run on that route yet, so for all I know, Dovetail may have actually taken the hint and finally fixed the stuttering in the time since I published that updated review. But even if they have, it doesn't change my other reasons for not liking this route. The absence of the LIRR's diesel locomotives in TSW means that we can't run passenger services to Long Island City in timetable mode. The electric trains only venture onto the branch in order to access the electrified stabling sidings at the terminus. Indeed, there are only 2 timetable mode services involving this branch, both with the M9. One of them is a departure to Jamaica in the morning, and the second is the run back to Long Island City in the afternoon, but they're both empty stock moves. Jamaica Station is a major transfer hub, with trains on all but one of the LIRR's branches calling at this station. The only exception is Port Washington, as that branches off the main line at Woodside. I remember that the original rendition of Jamaica Station was an absolute ghost town, without referencing that song by the Specials, and even more so than the rest of the route, which is really saying something. In real life, the station is the busiest on the network, but on the original TSW version, you were lucky to ever see more than 2 trains in the station at any one time. This is no longer the case on the updated route. Now we turn to the scenery, starting off with the streets around Nostrand Avenue station, which haven't really changed at all. The traffic is still just as unrealistically quiet as it was in the original 2018 release. For the purposes of this video, the close-up inspections I did focused on St Albans and the stations down the Long Beach branch, because I already know the other stations that were on the original route. For starters, I like the ability to walk up the stairs to the top of this parking building at Long Beach, because you can get a decent shot of the trains from up the top. Elsewhere at the station, there's a pair of ticket machines hovering a little bit off the ground, and that's hardly realistic. The Long Beach Road level crossing at Island Park looks very basic, and it's made worse by the road not being at the same height as the... What's the proper title for these slab-like things in the middle of a crossing? Or are they actually just called slabs? In any case, it looks really stupid when the vehicles come along and phase right through the slabs. This isn't the first time I've seen this problem, as it's also present at New Hall Station on the Antelope Valley line. See my review of the AVL if you're curious to hear my thoughts on it. Now I don't know about you, but to me, it's really weird seeing a grass texture under Platform B at Oceanside. There was some grass poking up through the platform to boot, not just here, but at Country Life Press over on the Hempstead branch as well. As for the nearby building assets, they look just as basic as they've always done. I also noticed one particular house asset that was copied and retextured, although the retextured one has this whacking great shed plonked in front of it. Meanwhile, if you go over to the Widener Avenue crossing and look over at the intersection to the west, you can see the scenery details of all time. Here's what it looks like in real life, according to Google Street View. Just next to the Anchor Avenue crossing, at the northern end of Oceanside Station, I also noticed this elevated platform with a box housing electrical equipment on it. For whatever reason, there is an invisible wall there to prevent you from walking up the steps. Thinking back to the crossing itself, and the roads all throughout the route, for that matter, the cars look really stupid because they're hovering above the road surface, as proven by this footage. Now this is just silly. The bottom part of the lift shaft at Lynbrook isn't modelled, despite the top part still being modelled there on the platform. And in general, the details under the tracks at this station look rather sloppy. Meanwhile, there's another lift at Valley Stream, but this one does have the bottom doors modelled. And why DTG skipped modelling the bottom of the lift shaft at Lynbrook is anyone's guess. As for the station building at Valley Stream, I think it looks reasonably well detailed, and the same can be said for Long Beach as well. It's also worth having a look at the abandoned Woodhaven station, located between Jamaica and East New York on the branch line to Atlantic Terminal. If my research is correct, the original station opened as part of the Rockaway Beach branch in the 1880s, with the Atlantic branch platforms not opening until 1893. In the early 1940s, the station was rebuilt as part of a project to grade separate the Atlantic branch, with the new underground platforms opening in 1942. This confused me at first, because I previously knew nothing about the history of this branch. Woodhaven continued to be an interchange with the Rockaway Beach branch, but that line closed south of Howard Beach after the Jamaica Bay Trestle Fire of 1950. 12 years later, in 1962, the rest of the Rockaway Beach branch closed. As for the remaining Atlantic branch platforms at Woodhaven, they would eventually close in 1977 after years of vandalism and dwindling passenger numbers. For whatever reason, Dovetail never bothered modelling Woodhaven Station on the original LIRR route, and only added it as part of the big update. They did a surprisingly good job of capturing the dingy/rundown feel of this station, and oddly enough, it reminds me of the underground stations on the Los Santos subway in GTA 5, although of course those stations were not abandoned, and the one that did look abandoned, Pillbox North, was actually depicted as just being closed for rebuilding. Overall, the scenery on this route is just mediocre, and not much better than the original 2018 version. Or maybe it just looks different because of the new lighting. The whole environment, not just the streets near the railway line, often looks unrealistically clean and lifeless, although of course the rail scene is anything but. Oftentimes I also noticed the same building assets copied and pasted several times over, besides that one house I pointed out back at Oceanside. And to top it all off, the performance on this route was annoyingly inconsistent on my end. It averaged between a mediocre 50 and 70 FPS, peaking at around 85, and plunged down to between 23 and 30 FPS at Jamaica, and not helping the situation was the frequent stuttering all throughout the route. But even so, I don't think it was as bad as New York to Trenton. To be as fair as I can to the extended Long Island Railroad, I do appreciate its non-linear nature, overhauled timetable, and extra branch to Long Beach, not to mention the addition of the M9. But this add-on is still a big letdown for me, as someone who had the original LIRR pack. I think it's soured by Dovetail's scummy pricing, and let's not forget the dumbed-down setup process on the M7 and M9, as well as the annoying ATC and ACSES systems that you can't turn off. Even if you're a fan of the Long Island Railroad who doesn't have the original add-on yet, I don't recommend the extended LIRR add-on for Train Sim World 4. Sure, it's nice to have the M9 and Long Beach branch in the game, but this payware route extension is a bit on the nose because we have had at least one free route extension before, in the form of the Meissen branch on Nachwerke Dresden. If they absolutely could not release the signal, timetable and route upgrades free of charge, then at the very least, Dovetail should have had a much larger loyalty discount in place, around 40 or 50% off, not a pathetic 10. Unless plans end up changing, my next TSW review should be about a good, or at least decent route for a change. For the time being, I will continue to review Train Sim World add-ons despite my often pessimistic/critical attitude towards Dovetail games, Rivet games, and several of their add-ons. As daft as it may sound at this point, I still believe that TSW can reach its full potential eventually, and in the words of D-Day Cobra from Geeks and Gamers, never stop holding these companies accountable, and never stop standing up for what you believe in.